Hello and welcome to kamna.co.uk. My name is Kamna and I am truly honoured that you are taking the time to read and learn all about what kamna.co.uk has to offer you. I am a mum of two, and to say that becoming a mum was a life-changing experience is an absolute understatement. I had a life before having children, and then my life was completely brand new after having children. I'm sure many of you mums can resonate with that feeling. So what's so special about kamna.co.uk? The easiest way to explain it is that I did not have the blissful pregnancy experience that I was hoping to have, and I had a very tough recovery period. Now, mums are giving birth to babies all the time, and as a naturally very maternal woman, I expected me to be able to deliver my babies with great ease, particularly because of my yoga, my dance background, and I also thought that I would be able to embrace motherhood very naturally and very easily. Unfortunately, it wasn't as smooth sailing as I thought it was going to be. And I would like to use all of the lessons that I learned and draw in all the tools that I've used to help me move on from my experience to help other mothers in the same position, particularly mothers that have had cesareans, and even more specifically, emergency cesareans. This is not a discussion about whether natural delivery is better or cesarean sections are better. At the end of the day, we just want our children, our babies, to be brought into the world safely, as safe as possible for ourselves as mothers, but we at that moment in time are more concerned with the safe arrival of our child, no matter what it takes. Am I correct? I found myself in a very similar position. So I'm just going to explain to you about my experience, because you might find that you're able to resonate with it, or it might just help you feel like you're not alone. Okay? So, here it goes. I had waited to become a mother for so long that when I actually discovered that I was pregnant with my son, I could not believe it. I was ecstatic, to say the least. Unfortunately, however, during that exact same period, my granddad was very sick, and within 2 days of finding out that I was expecting, my grandfather passed away. That was a real tough emotional encounter for me to deal with at the very beginning of my pregnancy, and I must admit that kind of set the tone for the rest of my pregnancy, in the sense that I was very close to my granddad. You see, my father passed away when I was 15, so my granddad had become like a second father to me. So hearing and learning about his passing away truly left me in a grieving state. It also left me quite emotionally vulnerable, and I felt quite lost. At the same time, my husband had just changed jobs, and he was based pretty far away from where we lived, approximately 60 miles, which meant he used to wake up very early and leave for work, spend a full entire day at work, and then come back pretty late and very tired. My husband had not long been at his job when we were fortunate enough to stumble across a property, so a flat that we liked the look of, which was not far from where we were living at the time. So we eventually moved into that flat whilst I was pregnant, and it was stressful. I know it's very common for people to move whilst they're expecting, because we all want to kind of upscale or uphouse, but I truly stressed out from it all because, I was already 3 months pregnant by the time the ball got rolling, and by the 4th month, When we got the keys, the entire place needed renovating, from changing the carpet to the curtains to buying everything from beds, mattresses, fridge, freezers, washing machines, everything, cutlery, kitchenware, everything needed to be bought for our place. And as my husband was in a new job and working quite far away, the majority of that kind of came down on me, as well as overseeing the workers that were doing the renovation work in our flat. And I'll be honest, they didn't make my life very easy. They stressed me out a lot. So I was in a state of quite high tension during my pregnancy. Not to mention that I was also completing my yoga diploma to become a qualified teacher, and also still running my dance agency. So I was still taking bookings and organising performers for these events. And I had a really large scale event which I managed, called Unity in the Community, which was a multicultural, diverse event in Barnet. And that also took its toll. So I had all these different factors contributing to my well-being at the time. And looking back on it, I can say that I suffered with depression during my pregnancy. I guess I was just so overwhelmed by everything that needed doing and everything that was my responsibility, that I just found myself inside. I was happy because I was pregnant and I knew I had, this joy to look forward to. But on a day-to-day level, I was not happy and I felt really unhappy. And not to mention, when you're Indian and you have the added factor of kind of like family pressures and expectations, then that also added to the mix and resulted in me feeling very low and very stressed out. Then, unfortunately, during my about 8th month of my pregnancy, I very stupidly climbed onto a stool to get something from my cupboard, and somehow I lost my balance and I went flying to the side. My ankle literally bent like at a 90-degree angle, and I fell to the floor. I was very lucky. I didn't seriously injure myself or injure my bump on the way down, but my leg was gone. I couldn't stand up after that. I was in an immense amount of pain, and I had to crawl to the phone to call my mother-in-law, who didn't have a key at the time. So luckily, I always want fresh air in my house, so my kitchen window was left just a tiny bit open, and I live on the first floor. So my mother and father-in-law came rushing to me, and luckily there were some window cleaners on the street, and they agreed to let my father-in-law use their ladder in order for him to climb up to the first floor through the window to then open the front door so that my mother-in-law could come in, and then they could both help me up, because I was literally on the floor. My foot felt like it had broken and it was just absolute agony. I've never been in so much pain before. So my experience of being pregnant and in this position at the hospital was also awful, because I was kind of left like everybody else to wait in the waiting room. And my pregnancy was tough in the sense that I was really hungry the whole time, as in seriously, I would eat 5 big meals a day and snack, and they were big, stodgy, carby meals. I was just insanely hungry. My hormones were all over the place. I was just extremely emotional. And I was made to wait in the waiting room for hours, and then I had to wait to have my scan done, and then I had to wait for the results, and there was just so much waiting around, and they refused to actually check the baby. So in the end they said if I wanted to have the baby checked, I'd have to refer myself to the triage clinic. So then I had to wait another like 3-4 hours at the triage, and I'm exhausted, my foot is ballooning up, and it just, generally speaking, it was a very horrific experience. And then I had to come home and climb up my stairs, and it was just awful. I couldn't walk. And even if I tried to say hop on the other foot, my baby bump was so big that every time I hopped, the whole body would just be in pain from it. So I couldn't hop, I couldn't walk. I was just driven to the point where when I used to wake up in the middle of the night to wee, or if I was hungry, I used to have to crawl on my hands and feet to the toilet. It was really bad. And then after a few weeks when my condition didn't improve, I went back to the hospital, and then they finally gave me like a support cast and crutches. But the crutches weren't really great because, again, you need to hop when you're using crutches, and that was just making my belly hurt even more. In my first pregnancy, I put on over 20 kilos. So I went from weighing about 70 kilos. In fact, I think I put on more than that. So I went from weighing between 70 to 75 kilos to 95, if not 97 at one point. So going from being this svelte belly dancer and yoga teacher to this 97 kilo pregnant, emotionally scattered woman just meant that I was already in the process of beginning to feel disconnected with my body, and also disconnecting from who I was before I got pregnant. On to the actual labour. So the actual labour as well was just an ordeal, to say the least. I was late, so my due date came and went, and my son still showed no signs of arriving. This was in 2017, when there was a huge heat wave happening as well. So the weather was like 36 degrees every day, and it was just becoming unbearable. And I remember at the time vomiting from the heat because I just could not take the heat. It was just insane. So Thursday at like 3 a.m, I finally felt as if I had labour pains and as if I was going into labour, because my pain started and it basically just continued. Now I phoned the triage, and they told me that I needed to wait until my contractions became a certain frequency per number of minutes or whatever it was. So we were waiting for that to happen, and my contractions were speeding up, and sometimes there would be like several in a few minutes, then there might be a gap, then there were several, and we were using an app on the phone to track the frequency of the contractions, but the intensity was insane. I was having contractions. So I was taken to A&E, and twice I got turned away because I hadn't dilated enough. They checked me, I hadn't dilated, they sent me home. And even the journey from my home to the hospital was a good 15-minute journey, and a very bumpy journey, and the contractions plus the weight of the baby, and my ankle, I was just in so much agony. It was horrible, and plus the heat. Eventually, on Saturday, I went back to the hospital, and a nurse who had seen me a couple of days prior to that felt really sorry for me. She said that I dilated 1 centimetre and agreed to have me admitted into the hospital. And I remember going to the hospital in so much pain and crying from the pain, and I was told to shut up by one of the nurses, and I was told to stop making so much noise, and I was basically just given a whole load of different drugs, which didn't really help with the pain, but it just sedated me. And after that, in that ward, I didn't make a sound. I was quiet as a mouse, even though I was in so much pain. I was not happy, but who could I talk to? On top of that, it was a really noisy ward. It was really hectic. It was hot. And I also had my mum, my mother-in-law, and my husband with me. I had people visiting. Like, it was just too much. You know, now I know that your labour experience is supposed to be done in a very dark, relaxing and calm setting, and my experience was not like that at all. It was just frantic. So I waited for the doctor, and the doctors weren't in the hospital that weekend. So I had to wait until Monday to be seen by a doctor. The doctor came along and he checked me, and he did a sweep in order to try and help my cervix dilate, because at this point my cervix still hadn't dilated. And shortly after the sweep, I noticed that my bed sheets were just covered in blood. So I informed one of the nurses there, and they felt that my water had broken, the sweep worked, I was ready to go into the labour ward and begin the process of labour. So I got wheeled down to the ward, ready to possibly be given, all the pain relief drugs to try and get through the natural labour process. But then one of the senior doctors came to examine me, and she told me that my waters were still intact and that they hadn't broken. And what was happening is, because I had been in labour for 5 days with 5 days of contractions, my placenta had ruptured and was beginning to tear away from, I don't know, the baby or my uterus wall. I'm not exactly sure, but the placenta had ruptured. That's what I remember. And that's when the doctor demanded that I have a cesarean. Now, of course, I'm not going to say no, because that moment was so crucial and intensive, and it was very frightening. Thankfully, my husband was with me. So we agreed to the cesarean, we signed the forms, and literally within, I'd say, 10 minutes, we were in the surgery room, and within 20 minutes, my son was born. And I kind of felt like, had I have known it was going to be, so much more straightforward, I would have probably booked a cesarean in the first place. But I really wanted a natural delivery. I had stated on my birthing plan that I'm willing to undergo anything except a cesarean. And as someone, like I said, who was from a dance, fitness, yoga background, I never in my life thought I would need a cesarean, especially as my mum delivered children naturally, so did both my grandmas. So I never ever expected that to occur. I'm the type of person that doesn't really rely on medicinal drugs, pharmaceutical drugs for anything. So I don't take paracetamols or anything like that. So to suddenly have undergone major surgery and also be pumped to the max with drugs. I mean, I had an unbelievable concoction of drugs given to me. And for a long time, I kept the list of drugs saved on my phone because I just found it unbelievable. But I've deleted that now because I just see no point in me keeping that and looking at it. But I'm telling you, I was given 8 to 10 different drugs, ranging from paracetamols to liquid paracetamols to morphine to I don't even remember. It was just all, literally, there was so many different drugs to help me with so many different things. And anyway, my baby was born at 5, just after 5 in the afternoon, and obviously I was just in cloud 9 after my baby was born, and I was just so happy that he was there. And I wasn't going to let the cesarean beat me down, so I was quite adamant to try and get walking as soon as possible, albeit slowly. But by 12 o'clock the next day, the hospital told me they were ready to discharge me and send me home. I didn't really think too much about it at the time. Looking back on it, I think that is shocking. I mean, I understand hospitals are stretched, but surely my well-being was important too, but not really. Anyway, my husband was fuming that, having undergone so much trauma in the past few days, to then be sent back home just so soon after everything I'd gone through just seemed quite unbelievable. But anyhow, they did send me home that day. by 5 o'clock in the afternoon I was home. When I got home, it was very stressful because I had lots and lots of family members waiting for me, and whilst I was happy that they were all there to share the moment of my son coming home for the first time, I really wish it could have been more intimate and just me and him. But that is one of the one of the things that comes with being in Asian families, is the family just always have to be there for everything. I found everybody being there, and plus my foot injury and then the shock of having to have had a cesarean, all a bit too much. And I think that really affected my ability to breastfeed my son well. There's no stigma for or against breastfeeding at all. I just assumed that I would be able to do it and that I would do it, but actually I really struggled and I was in a lot of pain, and I couldn't get, it was not my son's fault. I don't want to say I couldn't get my son to latch properly. I wasn't able to just build that rapport, that breastfeeding rapport. So it meant that I stopped breastfeeding very soon after he was born, and that led to a lot of internal disappointment. I felt as though I wasn't able to deliver my son naturally, and I also wasn't able to breastfeed him. So it meant I was a failure as a woman, and it just made me feel really unwomanly, and I felt very, very depressed, and I felt quite sick in myself, and as if I'd cheated my way through the birth, and I was cheating my way with the feeding, and as if I was some kind of fake. It really brought down my self-esteem more, and I did think, although I ate so much during my pregnancy, I don't think I realised how much weight I'd put on, because it happens gradually. But then once he was out, and obviously I didn't snap back, and that weight was all still there, and my belly was still there, and in fact I was in a worse state because I had just been cut open. I was left feeling pretty disgusted with myself and my body. It was just like a sensation of disgust towards myself that I had at that time. But I kept myself really busy with my son, and I just, would just take him out as much as possible for walks, as play groups, and just kept us really busy. And I really wanted another child quite soon because I just wanted to give him a sibling. So I got pregnant very quickly. My son was about 7.5 months when I found out I was pregnant again. And I was overjoyed and really excited this time. It was difficult because my husband wasn't as ready as I was to have another baby, but he obviously couldn't do anything about it. So this is when I would say it became a bit of a toll on my husband, because there was the responsibility of having moved out recently and changing his job recently, and the new role of becoming a parent recently, and suddenly we were going to have a second baby. And to be quite honest, we hadn't even been married that long before this all happened too. So I got pregnant, and my second pregnancy was much more pleasant than my first. I think because my son was so young, I was just so busy running around after him and being active and taking him out because the weather was really lovely, so just taking him for walks every day. I just generally felt really well, and I was eating well. Well, to be fair, I would sometimes not really get time to eat because I was just so busy with my son. I was eating relatively healthily, so by the time I got to my 5th month of pregnancy, you can't even tell that I was pregnant. I looked really well. Whereas with my son's pregnancy, by the 3rd month, I already looked very heavily pregnant. So I was having quite a positive experience, and I was really adamant that I was going to have that natural birth this time, that I don't know what happened last time. I wasn't sure what went wrong, but I was really keen to try and correct that this time round and do all the things that I should, such as keep active, walking. I was doing 10,000 steps a day. I was so active. I was just walking all the time, stretching, and I was even teaching my Bollywood fitness class once a week throughout my second pregnancy. So I was dancing, I was walking, I was just happy, and everything was great. Now, with my son, they missed the fact that he was going to be a big baby. So he was born at 8 pounds 10, and the doctors didn't clock onto that. So They think that might have been a contributing factor to how my labour was. I don't know. But anyway, so because of what happened with my son, I was assigned to the hospital. So basically, throughout my second pregnancy, I didn't have a midwife. I never saw the same doctor, consultant, nurse, or anybody more than once. I was basically on my own. I was expected to go to the hospital, particularly towards the end, every 2 weeks for a scan so that they could check to see if the baby was going to be a big baby, which they said that the baby was going to be a big baby. I didn't believe it, but this is what they were measuring me and putting me on the graph. And, you know, sometimes I would be in that hospital waiting room for up to 4 hours waiting for my appointment. It was just really unnecessary and really stressful, and I had no one to talk to because I didn't have a midwife. Towards the end, when I was still demanding a natural birth, they eventually got to see the consultant that I was supposed to have been seeing throughout my pregnancy. And he basically said that it was unsafe for me to try and have a natural delivery, and that it would be against their recommendation for me to try and have a natural delivery, and they were just against it. The argument was that because I'd already just had a baby less than 2 years before this pregnancy, there was a high risk of the pressure of pushing a baby out rupturing the scar tissue from my first cesarean. Of course, I agreed. I mean, I'm not going to argue against the professionals, am I? It turned out to be a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because when I did then go for my elective cesarean at week 39, they found out after cutting me open that I had very, very bad adhesions. And I was told that I was very lucky. It could have resulted in me needing to have a hysterectomy. But thankfully, it wasn't that serious. So my uterus and my bladder had like fused together weirdly. If you don't know what adhesions are when your scar tissues kind of go fuse all over the place. So before you have any kind of abdominal surgery, everything is kind of like where it should be. And this is apparently very common with abdominal surgery. I didn't know. So they cut me open and everything was just tangled up and stuck everywhere, and my organs from here had kind of like shifted up here, which I could sense because I was having a lot of uncomfortable breathing issues and heartburn, which I'd not had before. And there were a few things which now looking back on it, I can see that, yeah, the signs were there. But again, I had no midwife, so I had no one to talk to. And my hospital appointments were with a different person every single time. And I had really bad adhesions. They had to take out all the scar tissue from my first pregnancy, re-stitch that, untangle me, cut me up on the inside, re-stitch me, replace me. I could literally feel them tugging at me internally and pushing things down. And so I got sewed up. I was in the operating room for over an hour. I'm not to get emotional about this. And obviously my daughter was born and I was so happy. I couldn't feed her and she was screaming. She was so hungry. And anyway, eventually then my daughter is so clever. She kind of brought her own mouth to my breast and fed. And I ended up asking to stay in hospital because the pain that I was in was just excruciating. And I think I stayed in hospital 2 nights, and then I eventually went home. And it was really hard because obviously I couldn't pick my son up, and he was really confused as to why I was in hospital, and my daughter was there and he didn't know who this baby was. He was so young himself. And it was just really, really stressful, to be honest. And when I got home, the recovery after having a second cesarean was really tough. But I was just keeping really positive, and I just wanted to get better. So I I just wanted to get better so I could look after my children. So I just threw myself into getting on with it and raising my children. My husband was off for a month from work, which was really helpful. I was fine for about 3 months. Once my daughter passed the 3-month mark, for some reason, everything just became really difficult. I suddenly started getting very depressed, and I think my husband was going through depression as well. And we were suddenly disagreeing about everything, and mostly to do with the kids. And I just felt very unhappy with my body, unhappy with myself, unhappy with my shape. And it was a really tough road to recovery. And I think it got to the point where that July, so my daughter must have been about 7 months old, my back went for the first time ever in my life. I mean, I've heard of people's backs going. I never ever thought it would ever happen to me, but my back went. Again, and something new that had never happened to me, but not being able to move and your back being out of action is the most disabling feeling in the world. And that's when I really reached rock bottom, and I realised that something had